The morning sun had barely risen over Pearl Harbor when one question hung over the Pacific like a storm cloud. Why would any commander send a badly damaged aircraft carrier back into battle against the most powerful navy on Earth? It sounded less like a military plan and more like a desperate gamble. The USS Yorktown had returned from the Battle of the Coral Sea scarred, flooded, and barely holding together.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
Many believed she should spend months in dry dock. Instead, within days, she was sailing toward an enemy that had already destroyed battleships, conquered islands, and seemed impossible to stop. To the men aboard her, the order made little sense. To the Japanese, it would become the mistake they never saw coming. But to Admiral Chester Nimitz, it was the only move that could change the war. Just 6 months earlier, on December 7, 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor had shaken the United States. Battleships burned in the harbor. Thousands of sailors lost their lives. Across the Pacific, Japanese forces advanced with stunning speed. Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies all fell one after another. Every headline pointed to the same conclusion. Japan seemed unstoppable. Behind those victories stood Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet. Yamamoto understood America had greater industrial strength, but he believed Japan could win by striking hard before that strength could be fully used. His plan depended on destroying America's aircraft carriers. Without them, the United States would struggle to fight across the vast Pacific Ocean. The problem for Japan was simple. The American carriers had not been at Pearl Harbor during the attack. They had survived by chance. That single fact forced Yamamoto to search for another opportunity. He believed that if he could lure the remaining American carriers into one decisive battle and destroy them, Japan could secure control of the Pacific for years. While Japanese planners prepared their next move, another battle changed everything. In early May 1942, the Battle of the Coral Sea became history's first major naval battle fought almost entirely by aircraft. The opposing fleets never saw each other directly. Instead, aircraft carried the fight across hundreds of miles of open water. The USS Yorktown, under the command of Captain Elliot Buckmaster, fought fiercely alongside the carrier USS Lexington. American pilots damaged the Japanese carrier Shokaku and helped sink the light carrier Shoho. But victory came at a heavy price. Lexington was lost after massive explosions ripped through her hull. Yorktown was hit by a bomb that tore through her flight deck, damaged boilers, and left fires burning deep inside the ship. When the battle ended, Yorktown looked exhausted. Steel plates were twisted, compartments were flooded, machinery had been damaged. Navy engineers estimated the repairs would require at least 3 months. Some believed even that estimate was optimistic. On May 27, 1942, Yorktown entered Pearl Harbor. Workers expected a long repair project. Instead, they found Admiral Chester Nimitz waiting with a question that stunned everyone. How long until she can fight? The answer came back quickly. Approximately 90 days. Nimitz looked at the damage reports. Then, he looked at the calendar. He already knew something almost no one else knew. Time was running out. Weeks earlier, in a quiet building far from the front lines, American codebreakers had been fighting a very different battle. Led by Commander Joseph Rochefort at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor, they had been working day and night to break Japanese naval codes. Their rooms were hot, crowded, and filled with the sound of typewriters and radio intercepts. Every intercepted message could mean the difference between victory and disaster. The codebreakers believed Japan was preparing a massive operation against a target identified only as AF. Many officers in Washington were unsure what AF meant. Some believed it could be Hawaii. Others argued it pointed somewhere entirely different. Rochefort was convinced AF meant Midway Atoll. But conviction was not enough. Nimitz needed proof before risking his entire fleet. An unusual idea solved the mystery. Midway sent an uncoded radio message reporting that its fresh water system had failed. Soon afterward, American intelligence intercepted a Japanese coded transmission reporting that AF was short of fresh water. The mystery disappeared instantly. AF was Midway. Now, Nimitz faced an impossible decision. He knew where Japan planned to attack. He even had a rough estimate of when the attack would happen. But knowing the enemy's destination did not solve his biggest problem. He simply did not have enough ships. The United States possessed only 3 operational fleet carriers in the Pacific: US Enterprise, US Hornet, and the heavily damaged US Yorktown. If Yorktown stayed in Pearl Harbor, Nimitz would enter battle with only 2 carriers. If one of those carriers was lost, America could lose control of the Pacific. If Yorktown sailed and failed, the result could be even worse. It was a choice with no safe answer. Most commanders might have waited. Nimitz did not. Instead, he walked through the repair reports again. He spoke with engineers. He listened carefully as experts explained what was absolutely necessary for combat and what could wait until later. Then he issued one of the boldest orders of the Pacific War. Repair only what she needs to fight. Everything else can wait. The order transformed Pearl Harbor into a race against time. More than 1,400 civilian workers, Navy shipyard employees, engineers, welders, electricians, pipefitters, and sailors flooded aboard Yorktown. They worked around the clock. Lights stayed on through the night. Sparks from welding torches filled the air. Heavy cranes swung replacement equipment into place, while crews removed shattered steel and installed temporary supports. Instead of restoring the carrier to perfect condition, they focused on survival. Flight operations had to work. Boilers had to produce enough steam. The steering system had to respond. Anti-aircraft guns had to fire. Damage control equipment had to function. Everything else became secondary. Men skipped sleep. Meals were eaten beside machinery. Every hour mattered because intelligence suggested Japan would strike within days. Even with the frantic repairs, no one believed Yorktown would be perfect. She did not need to be. She only needed to fight one battle. As work continued in Hawaii, Japanese planners remained confident. They believed the Battle of the Coral Sea had removed Yorktown from the war. Japanese reconnaissance reports listed the carrier as badly damaged and unavailable for future operations. That assumption quietly became one of the greatest intelligence failures of the entire campaign. Yamamoto expected to face only 2 American carriers. Nimitz intended to surprise him with 3. The difference sounded small. In reality, it meant dozens of additional fighters, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and hundreds of trained sailors appearing where Japan believed none existed. It was exactly the kind of hidden advantage Nimitz needed. On May 30, only 72 hours after arriving at Pearl Harbor, the battered US Yorktown slipped out of the harbor once again. Workers on the docks watched silently as the carrier disappeared over the horizon. Some wondered if they would ever see her again. Even Captain Buckmaster knew his ship was not fully repaired. Temporary patches covered damaged areas. Some systems still needed attention. Everyone aboard understood they were sailing into the most dangerous mission of their lives. Yet something unusual happened as the carrier headed northwest. The fear slowly changed into confidence. The crew had watched hundreds of workers perform what many believed was impossible. They knew every repaired pipe, every welded plate, and every tested engine represented people back home who believed the mission mattered. The ship was wounded. But she was alive. Ahead lay Midway Atoll. Somewhere beyond the horizon, 4 of Japan's finest fleet carriers were already moving toward the same destination. Neither fleet had seen the other. Neither side knew exactly where the first blow would land. But one commander already held a secret that would shape everything that followed. Nimitz knew where Japan was going. The only question left was whether his greatest gamble would become history's greatest victory, or America's greatest disaster. On the evening of June 3, 1942, the Pacific looked calm. The ocean stretched in every direction, hiding 2 powerful fleets that were moving toward the same point. Thousands of sailors, pilots, and commanders knew a battle was coming. None of them knew exactly when the first attack would begin. The silence itself became part of the tension. Every radio message mattered. Every aircraft launch could change history. Before dawn on June 4, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's carrier force reached its launch position northwest of Midway. At 4:30 a.m., aircraft began roaring off the decks of the carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Their mission was simple: strike Midway first, destroy its airfields, then prepare for the next step of Yamamoto's plan. If American carriers appeared, they would be eliminated afterward. Nagumo believed he controlled the battle. From everything Japan knew, only 2 American carriers could possibly oppose him. Yorktown was supposed to be sitting in dry dock at Pearl Harbor. That single mistake shaped every decision he made during the next few hours. The first Japanese aircraft reached Midway shortly after sunrise. Bombs exploded across the island. Fuel tanks burned. Buildings collapsed. Smoke rose into the morning sky. But the defenders fought back. Anti-aircraft guns filled the air with black bursts of flak. American Marine pilots launched outdated fighters and attacked despite overwhelming odds. Many never returned, but they forced the Japanese to keep fighting instead of flying home in perfect order. The strike leader radioed Nagumo with an important message. Midway had been damaged, but it was not destroyed. Another attack would be needed. That report placed Nagumo in a difficult position. His reserve aircraft below deck had already been armed with anti-ship weapons in case American carriers appeared. Now he faced a choice. Should he prepare another strike against Midway, or keep those aircraft ready for a naval battle that might never happen? He decided to change the weapons. Inside the hangar decks, crews began removing torpedoes and loading bombs. Fuel hoses were connected. Bomb carts rolled through crowded spaces. Aircraft were moved from one position to another. It was a complicated process that took valuable time. Then everything changed. A Japanese scout aircraft finally reported enemy ships to the east. The message arrived late. Even worse, the first report did not clearly identify an aircraft carrier. Nagumo suddenly reversed his decision. Now he wanted anti-ship weapons again. Aircraft already being rearmed had to be changed once more. The hangar decks became crowded with bombs, torpedoes, fuel lines, and aircraft waiting for orders. Every minute increased the confusion. At almost the same time, American carriers had already begun launching their own aircraft. From Enterprise, Hornet, and the repaired Yorktown, wave after wave of fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers climbed into the morning sky. The launches were not perfectly coordinated. Squadrons became separated. Some flew different headings. Others struggled to find the Japanese fleet across hundreds of miles of open ocean. For many American pilots, the next few hours became a lonely search over endless water. The first attacks went badly. Torpedo Squadron 8 from Hornet reached the Japanese fleet without fighter escort. Flying slow Douglas TBD Devastators, they pressed forward anyway. Japanese Mitsubishi A6M-0 fighters attacked from every direction. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky. One by one, the American torpedo bombers were shot down. Almost every aircraft disappeared into the sea. Only Ensign George Gay survived. Floating in the water with a life jacket, he watched the battle continue around him. From that lonely position, he witnessed one of the greatest turning points in naval history. Other American torpedo squadrons attacked as well. Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise suffered terrible losses. Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown also fought through intense fire. Their attacks failed to score a single torpedo hit. At first glance, it looked like complete disaster, but something important had happened. The Japanese Combat Air Patrol had been pulled down to low altitude while chasing the torpedo bombers. Their careful defensive formation had been disrupted. The sky above the fleet was no longer protected as it had been earlier that morning. Far above them, American dive bombers were still searching. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey of Enterprise faced a critical decision. Fuel was running low. The Japanese fleet was nowhere in sight. Turning back meant saving his aircraft but losing the opportunity. Continuing the search meant risking that everyone would run out of fuel before returning. McCluskey trusted his instincts. He noticed the Japanese destroyer Arashi racing north at high speed after finishing an attack on the American submarinus Nautilus. Destroyers usually stayed with the main fleet. If Arashi was rushing to catch up, then it might lead directly to Nagumo's carriers. McCluskey followed the destroyer's wake. Minutes later, the impossible happened. Below the clouds lay the Japanese carrier force. The carriers were still recovering aircraft. Fuel hoses remained connected. Bombs and torpedoes crowded the hangar decks. Fighter patrols were still flying at low altitude after chasing the torpedo bombers. The fleet was exposed at the worst possible moment. At approximately 10:22 a.m., American dive bombers rolled into their attacks. Pilots pushed their Douglas Speedy Dauntless aircraft into steep dives. Sirens screamed. Wind roared across the wings. The carriers grew larger every second. Bombs released. Seconds later, explosions tore through Kaga. Another series of bombs smashed into Akagi. Nearby, Soryu erupted in flames. Within minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 frontline carriers had become burning wrecks. The sudden destruction shocked both sides. Just minutes earlier, Nagumo had expected to launch a massive counterattack. Now 3 of his carriers were beyond saving. The battle had turned with breathtaking speed. But it was not over. The carrier Hiryu had escaped the first wave. Her air group launched immediately. Japanese aircraft soon found Yorktown. The damaged carrier that everyone believed should have remained in Pearl Harbor now stood directly in the center of the fight. Captain Elliot Buckmaster ordered sharp evasive maneuvers. The crew watched enemy aircraft racing toward them. Bombs fell. One exploded through the flight deck. The blast killed sailors and started fires. Damage control teams rushed into smoke-filled compartments. Training took over. Within minutes, fires were contained. The ship continued operating aircraft. To Japanese pilots, it appeared they had heavily damaged one American carrier. Later that afternoon, another attack from Hiryu reached the American fleet. This time, torpedoes slammed into Yorktown's port side. The carrier lost power. She developed a dangerous list. Many aboard believed she would sink. The order came to abandon ship. Sailors climbed down ropes into waiting destroyers. Looking back, they saw the carrier leaning badly, but still refusing to disappear beneath the waves. Even in her wounded condition, Yorktown continued serving the mission Nimitz had imagined. She had absorbed the attacks that otherwise might have struck another American carrier. Meanwhile, American scouts found Hiryu. Late that afternoon, dive bombers attacked again. Bombs crashed into the final Japanese carrier. Soon, Hiryu was burning out of control. By nightfall on June 4, all 4 Japanese fleet carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor just 6 months earlier had been destroyed or fatally damaged. The balance of power in the Pacific had changed in a single day. The battle continued for several more days. Japanese heavy cruiser Mikuma was sunk. Other ships were damaged during the retreat. Salvage crews even returned to Yorktown, hoping they could save her once again. For a moment, it seemed possible. Then, on June 6, the Japanese submarine 168 slipped through the American destroyer screen. It fired a spread of torpedoes. Several struck Yorktown. Others hit the destroyer Hammond, which sank quickly. The additional damage sealed Yorktown's fate. On the morning of June 7, 1942, after one final struggle against the sea, Yorktown slowly rolled onto her side and slipped beneath the Pacific. She had fought one battle too many, yet her loss carried extraordinary meaning. The carrier that experts believed needed 3 months of repairs had sailed after only 72 hours of emergency work. She launched aircraft that helped cripple Japan's carrier force. She absorbed repeated enemy attacks. Most importantly, she was present when America needed every available flight deck. Without Yorktown, the outcome at Midway might have been very different. When historians study the Battle of Midway, they often point to intelligence, pilot skill, or simple luck. All 3 played important roles. But none of them mattered until one commander accepted a risk that almost everyone else would have rejected. Admiral Chester Nimitz understood something that great leaders often recognize. Waiting for perfect conditions can be more dangerous than acting with imperfect ones. He did not send Yorktown because she was fully repaired. He sent her because time would never give him another chance. The gamble looked reckless. History proved it was calculated. In just a few hours, Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, hundreds of experienced naval aviators, and the offensive power it had built over many years. Those losses could never be fully replaced. America, by contrast, was only beginning to unlock its industrial strength. New carriers, aircraft, and trained crews would soon enter the war in growing numbers. Midway did not end the Pacific War, but it ended Japan's ability to control its direction. And at the center of that victory stood a battered carrier that refused to stay in port, a crew that refused to quit, and an admiral who understood that sometimes the greatest victories belong to those willing to risk everything before anyone else can see the outcome. That is why the story of Yorktown is remembered not as the story of a crippled ship, but as the story of one impossible gamble that changed the course of World War II in the Pacific forever.